Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Shine Seminars show on YouTube. And today I have the most amazing, incredible guest. First YouTube interview we've done together. We have met in person a few times. And I'm very delighted and honored to have Rachel of Colchester on. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, Eli, and it's I'm honoured to be here as well. I can't believe this is our first interview. As you say, we have met a few times in person.
Yeah, yeah. So, Rachel, you're doing sterling work. Um, what can I say? Uh, Interesting. You're kind of in the cauldron, aren't you? You go into these council buildings and you just kind of spark your truth. You tell the story as it is, how you see it. It's very fact-based. It's very objective. It's very powerful what you do because you kind of just go, well, actually, there's this. Have you heard of this? Have you seen this? Have anybody in the room talked about this before? And it's very powerful. You kind of offer a question up, don't you? You kind of say, well, this is what you're doing, but actually there is something else, and this something else has a truth. So my first question is, how did you get into this?
Well, someone volunteered me. um, is basically because I'm normally the shy, quiet one that sits at the back of the room and doesn't say anything. But I'd arrived to the first council meeting so late that I ended up sitting at the front. So of course I was able to be tapped on the shoulder when they asked for two volunteers to come up and speak. It was got Rachel, will you do it? It's like, oh, and then boom. So that's how I found myself in it. And I made such a hash of that first one because I had no clue what was going on because I'd arrived so late that once I realised that Colchester Council wanted to bring in a whole load of EVs and they'd already started with the electric scooters and then all these electric bikes and things and plans for a rapid transit bus system as well. And anyone that's been, on the alternative media for any length of time has seen the sheer number of fires. Now, this was over a year ago, so they weren't that seen on mainstream media as they are now. But even so, they don't show the number that we've probably all sat through. So it was really to go and warn them, look, this stuff isn't safe. And as we started to research that, we then looked into the manufacturer and then realized, oh, this isn't like even vaguely green or environmentally friendly. This is awful. And then you get on to the, not only is it very polluting, absolutely disastrous for the environment, these lithium extraction with the sulfuric acid and radioactive uranium, the permanent waste that comes up will contaminate the water supply for up to 300 years. I mean, it's like, how is that going to save the planet? So we were very lucky to have a talk a couple of weeks before we went in by David Charalambous from reachingpeople.net. And he said, look, if you communicate in the right way, i.e., you don't go in there and bang your fists on the table and tell them they're doing things wrong, you're sort of non-confrontational in your approach, then you've got a greater chance of reaching people, hence the name of his website. So we tried that approach of, so it sort of, I'd bought lithium battery and I'd bought solar because I hadn't researched it properly. So I was able to go in and say, look, I thought this was good. It isn't. And here's why. And that we come in from an educational perspective, first and foremost, but also we're working with a group called the Peacekeepers that help us from a legislative point of view so that we have a little bit more armory to what we're saying, because not only are we saying this is bad physically, morally, but you're also liable here. You're sometimes not adhering to your code of conduct. So we're coming at it from many angles, but we come at it in a very calm way. A lot of these council officials are used to people coming in being very cross and almost shouty. Whereas if you do the opposite, it's quite difficult for them to really arm themselves against people coming in and being incredibly reasonable. I've come to think that, being calm and reasonable in today's age is somewhat of a superpower because that isn't what we're sort of guided to do by the mainstream media. It's all very fighty. When you don't do that and you evidence, we don't come in with any claims that we cannot evidence. So that is what we've been doing for the last year or so.
Mm. It's fantastic work you've done, and it's grown and evolved. And I noticed recently that you changed the name from Colchester Council Watch, and you're encompassing more. Have you been contacted by many people? Are you in terms of a network or shared resources or shared ideas, shared approaches? Where are we sitting at the moment with the amount of people or the amount of councils that are being kind of audited, I suppose, in a way. But
Watched.
yeah, that's it. Actually watched. Yeah. Are you getting information? Are people contacting you? What's the kind of feeling, around the country?
Well, from day one, we set up a Dropbox resource folder so that people could take those speeches and go into their local councils, which people up and down the country have done, and also worldwide, which was quite surprising. I wasn't anticipating that. And then we changed into, because we were studying the council, because we didn't have a clue how they function, we started watching their meetings. And then after 9 months, we thought, well, actually, everybody in the local area needs to know and understand how the council is working and what they're up to. So we thought we'd do sort of these 15-minute précis of their 3 or 4 hour meetings. And again, it was specifically for Colchester, but then we've ended up with an audience. Everybody's watching them from all over, including other countries, because councils more or less all function in a very similar way. And then, yes, we've ended up with people. We created a playlist of videos of here's how you talk to your council. If you want to video your meetings and edit them, so there's a whole series of how to basically do your own council watch. Here's what we've learned. Here's how you can do it. And then I started a Telegram group for official Council Watch channels where we're all together brainstorming and sharing information. And I think we've got about 10 now up and down the country. And also recently an article has come out in the Light newspaper, sort of a call to more people to do it, because the more you put the spotlight on them, the harder it is for them to carry on doing what they're doing, because a lot of times they're legally bound to do consultations on any changes that they're planning to make. But these consultations, they're not widely known until after the event. And if the newspapers don't pick them up, most people are none the wiser. And also they give you such a short space of time to challenge them. It's like, yeah, we told you, bye, and off we're going to go and do it now.
Yeah.
Whereas if we're watching those meetings and reporting on them right at the get-go, more people have an opportunity to have their say and potentially stop things that are going to be detrimental.
One thing I have noticed is there's a kind of a stony silence from councils. The way in which they operate. I mean, from my point of view, I don't see much open-hearted behaviour from the councils. I don't see it being very discussive or discuss. There's not an open conversation going on in councils. It's very much like the chair, the meetings, the town clerk. They're all playing roles, and you really do have to put your case forward, and then it's objective. And I guess my question is do you think that structure of the council and the way that councils operate offers the people an opportunity to have their say?
Oh, it offers the opportunity, but whether they'll do anything different is another matter. It
Yeah.
feels like it's a giant machine
Yeah.
and the cogs are turning. And yes, you can have your say, but they'll just carry on going regardless of what you've actually said, has been our experience. You might get them to deviate the direction by, 1 degree or something if you're lucky. So it's really what goes on behind the scenes that interests us. It's the council officers, because they are steering the councillors to make decisions in certain ways. And for example, with the climate emergency, they haven't given them both sides of the argument. In fact, they gave them no information whatsoever to declare a climate emergency. And a lot of these councillors have full-time jobs, they're busy people, they're parents. How on earth are they supposed to be researching a topic as vast as net zero and climate change? They can't. So basically, they're going on what they've heard on the BBC or something. And the council officers, oh, well, the IPCC says, well, it's like, well,
Yeah.
they've never actually declared a climate emergency, so why on earth are you? And they cannot answer that question. We've written to them asking, could you define the parameters of said climate emergency? And none of them can. There isn't a single person in that council that can tell us the boundaries and parameters of that climate emergency. So we said, well, if you don't know what it is to start, if you can't describe it. How are you going to know when the climate emergency is over? And they're all just like,
Wow.
I don't know. And then they refer back to the IPCC again and say, oh, well, we've got to stop the temperature rising by 1.5 degrees. It's like, okay, could you evidence that getting the entire population of Colchester on a bicycle is actually going to make any discernible difference to global temperatures? And it's like, well, no. And I've got
Yeah.
in the Dropbox folder, I also put not only the speeches, but our freedom of information requests go in there, and also the emails that we've had backwards and forwards on this particular topic. And one of the climate email stream is 9 months long. Now, they didn't respond every month, so there's not that many emails, but it's quite entertaining reading if you've got a dark sense of humor, with what we're asking for the evidence and what they keep giving us and how slippery they get with it. And basically, they've got no evidence for it.
No, it's obfuscation, isn't it? 100%. It's like they're just putting things in the way and obstacles. So clearly, it's all being, it's a global agenda that's dropping down, and they've got their mechanisms in place. Are you finding any success on an individual level with individual councillors? Are they playing party lines? Are you getting people? In my previous life, I used to be a project manager, and we used to have this. Our pet hate was people having conversations by the water cooler, and we'd say, "Oh, that's a water cooler decision," and so we'd have these meetings, and we'd come out of these meetings, and then two of our developers would go and have a cup of coffee or something, and then they make the decisions, and you know, and are you finding that there's that sort of um, dynamic, or is it very much they're not listening to you at all? Have you got any relationships with the councillors, and are you making a difference? Is the question really?
We are, but not with any of the ones that are in power. So therefore, you don't know if it's political. But I think with some of them, there's one or two that have come up to us after meetings, and they're like, oh, thank you for coming in. Please keep going. And some of them have sort of come up to us afterwards and said, yeah, I thought this was wrong, but I couldn't voice it. So having sort of, to begin with, we like 30 people turned up, but we found actually, although having a large number of people come in makes a statement, it also scared the bejesus out of them, and it caused a whole load of problems. So now we kind of just go in like one or two of us, and there's sometimes a few more, but basically we do stealth mode rather than en masse, because when they're scared, they're not listening. Although why they'd be scared of three middle-aged women in cardigans and a handful of pensioners, who knows? But anyway, they're just so not used to having the general public,
Yeah,
living ones, in there with them, that yeah, it did freak them out a bit. But those that have listened have really taken it on board. In fact, in December last year, there was another vote on the climate emergency. And bearing in mind, the first time they voted, it was unanimous. 51 councillors agreed to it. This time round, because they're basically pushing the government for more funding and more stricter measures for net zero, 17 turned around and said no. Now, admittedly, they were all in the opposition. So you're
yeah,
not to know how much of that was party politics, but a lot of them that did speak listed the reasons that we have gone in with, like the EVs, the slave labor, and the fact they're polluting, and there's no real way to recycle them effectively. It costs more to recycle a solar panel than it does to make it.
yeah.
And there's not many places that do it. So the concerns we've raised have definitely reached them. But those that are in other teams, I think they have to toe the party line. So we, on an individual level, yes, we've reached some.
Yeah. Is there any evidence of independent councillors, or a movement of independent people standing up and saying, I want to be part of the council? Have you seen any of that at all?
Yes, I mean, a few people I know have run as an independent, but one, you've got to have the money to print all those
Yeah.
leaflets and get them delivered. So not having the support of a political party, one of the councillors told me that the leaflets, they spend £5,000 and they have a team of people for 6 weeks going out and delivering those leaflets for them.
Yeah,
So how, for an independent person to
never gonna happen.
compete with that, it's hard going. So that was one of the reasons we set up the Council Watch channel, because we thought, well, if we can get a big enough audience, one understanding what's going on locally, it must spur some people on to see how that council is run and go, oh my goodness, I can't sit by and this is nonsense. I'm going to run. And then ideally, we could do some fundraisers for anyone who wants to stand as an independent councillor. And
Yeah,
then hopefully some of the other councillors might come over to that side of things as well, because there's several councillors in various teams, and they've swapped teams and gone backwards and forwards, and you can see they're not really comfortable
yeah,
in any particular team, but financially they need to be.
yeah,
So if we could reach those councillors, and they're very hard working ones as well, they just need a little bit of help from the local community. And let's face it, if everyone in Colchester chipped in £1, that would be nearly £200,000. That
yeah,
would pay for any form of advertising, or if someone's on a low income and needs a bit of additional support, if they've had to give up a part-time job or something to be a really good counsellor, that is worth us funding people to get the right people in place.
yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? The power is truly with the people. It's actually getting people all to funnel that energy and that £1, like you say, into a pot that then can be used for the people. I know from an example, well, I think it's with all the councils. You could put a council body together yourself of amazing people who are really going to work for the people, as opposed to work for the parties or the higher up systems. Um, and if you did that and you gave them the choice, I think a lot of people would go for the people who are actually working for the community. It seems the mechanisms are just, the incumbent mechanism is not working. It's not designed to work properly. It keeps people, like you say, financially from not running. Have you spoken to other people in the Council Watch kind of network that are talking about parallel communities? Is that a topic of some conversation?
It has been, but we're not really at a point. I mean, there's people doing shadow councils, but what we really, if we're really serious about doing this, we need to set up a legal entity and do it properly. I was talking to Damien Jones, who's a fabulous legal paralegal, and he's got together with the people of Sudbury to fight Baber District Council on their parking charges, which is going to kill the town. And just as an off the cuff comment, he happened to mention prior to us doing an interview together that, if you set up a private trust and you could create your private council, and then or any money you raise in council tax, you could do it separately from so it wouldn't have to go to the government,
Mm.
because so much goes there. Now, I may not have, because it was an off the I may
Yep.
not have said what he said exactly, so don't quote me on that, but he basically said it's possible. So I need to interview him. There was so much we had to talk about. It didn't make this interview, so I will be speaking to him again, and so that we are in our mind to one day do this ourselves, because we need to. But it's getting more people involved. We're at the beginning stages, so we need to get that interest first to be part of a council, for people to see how it works or doesn't work, depending on your point of view. And then once people have a better understanding, then we can go forward and do something that is better. At the moment, nobody wants to touch it with a barge pole, because let's face it, everyone's lives are busy, and we'd all much rather have someone else do it. But we are all going to have to roll up our sleeves and get involved in some way or another. And something I want to start covering on the Council Watch channel soon is, what systems can we put in place that make it idiot proof, so it doesn't matter who runs it, because everyone leaves comments saying, oh yeah, you should run a council, blah blah blah. And you think, you know nothing about me. You don't even know if I could run a coffee shop, let alone a council. Or some people say you should be running the country, and it's like it's half
Yeah.
sort of concerning and half hilarious that it's like anyone, oh, you look all right, you'll do. People will literally have anybody vote, do anything as long as they don't have to do it themselves. And that doesn't, okay, if say some miracle we do get good people running the country or councils, what happens when they go? Then the circle keeps repeating itself. So we need to come up with systems that will protect us from that. And I've got a few in my brain that I'm going to spit out in a video soon on Council Watch. But if we all put our heads together and come up with, here's how it should be run to stop the things that are going wrong now from happening. And I think if we focus on what we want to create, because I do get a lot of, and it's a fair criticism that, yeah, it's all right critiquing or, from the cheap seats calling out what's going wrong, but what solutions are you offering? And it's like, well, to begin with, we just want to show this is what's happening. But I do take that criticism. We do need to be coming up with alternatives. Otherwise, we're just there slinging insults from the cheap seats. So that's
Yeah.
the direction we should all move towards.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is you're casting a light and exposing the kind of the inequalities and the this disparaging nature of the councils, and also the way in which they're just a huge machine just running. And if you've got, I mean, it's almost AI at the top anyway. If you've got these agendas coming in and they're just being rolled out by these human, kind of dumb waiter characters, then it is, it doesn't really make sense. I was just thinking, have you spoken to Chris Coverdale at all? Have you spoken to?
I haven't. I was on a Zoom call with him in a group, but I haven't had a chance to speak to him directly.
Yeah, because I think that he's just set a whole bunch of stuff up about moving tax into a community fund. Because
Mm.
I mean, I watch some YouTube channels, and one of the things I've noticed recently is kind of people who are waking up to this craziness that's going on, and these councils that are not working for the people, is that just very, everyday people are saying, well, I'll empty my own bins. And you know what? I'll fill my own potholes, and I can get 3 or 4 people around the corner and we'll go and buy some tarmac and we'll do it out ourselves,
Mm.
and so what are we paying for? Well, we're paying for the fire service and we're paying for the police. Well, everybody wants a fire service, everybody wants the police, but let's see what the alternatives are. Very interesting.
Well, in Colchester, 74 pence of every pound goes to Essex County Council. What the hell
Yeah.
are they doing with it? They're certainly not fixing the roads.
No. No, it is. There's a huge amount. I mean, it's like an energy harvesting machine, isn't it? And they're just taking our money off us and not actually giving us anything in return. I do like the idea of parallel communities, and I know it has worked in with Havel in Czechoslovakia. That's what happened over there. They all went from
And
big,
Brussels.
and Brussels as well. Yeah,
Just outside of Brussels, we had someone leave a comment saying they set up a charity
yeah.
and they put injunctions against the council and they're now running things themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that getting into the kind of the mechanism of the system is super important, because one, I understand when people say, well, what are you doing about it? That's a very flippant, off the cuff remark, because actually the general public don't really know what's happening. And so we do need, first of all, to get the headlights out and just go, look what's happening, everybody, look what's happening. And that's like the first bit. That's the first stage. And it's super important, because, I look around where I live and my neighbors don't know anything. They know absolutely nothing. They're just tooting along in their lives, and they don't realize that there's all this big machine coming in. So I think it's really powerful work you're doing, Rachel. And I'm gonna wrap it up, actually, if that's okay with you. I'm gonna do.
Yep.
I'd love to do another interview with you, and I'd like to kind of just tap into your progress, because it's absolutely amazing what you're doing, and you are trailblazing. And the fact that there are now another 10 or so councils coming along, and that one of the things I really appreciate about what you're doing is it's very open source, it's very accountable, it's very transparent, and you're just going, there you go, and I think that's the way forward. That kind of open source everywhere mentality of getting the information and going, well, you do it. If you're interested in it, here's the information, off you go and you do it. It's there's a couple of things that I feel that is really interesting. First of all, you're kind of pattern disrupting, if you know what I mean by that. You're disrupting the
Mhm.
pattern, which is really, really important. And also, I feel that you're like what I would call it's decentralized, self-organizational, if you want to put it in those terms. So it's like you're part of a self-organizing decentralized system, so there's nobody at the top, so there's no vulnerability. It's all on the ground. It's kind of circular, so it's all the people on the ground. And in an amazing way, you've kind of been the catalyst of being this self-organizing organism. So everybody within your network is now self-organizing, and I think that's really, really powerful, because that shows the current incumbent system as being, you know all the things that we don't want, and it's being replaced by this self-organizing system, which is actually the people on the ground. And I'm really excited. I'm genuinely excited when I see what the updates are, because it's kind of like, it's a bit like a book, isn't it, in a way? For those people who still read books, it's like, chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, and there's a thread and the characters, and and in some ways it's almost like, I mean, I'm not saying it's like Crown Court, but you know, it's got that kind of soap opera-esque feel, and the way that you present it is very entertaining. So it's quite engaging. I mean, it would be interesting to kind of get some interviews with some of these councillors and just see what they're like, actually on camera. Because obviously they have to play that role, don't they, in the council chamber. Uh, but it would be nice to actually see the human side of some of these people, and what their
Yeah, well, we
motivations
did
are.
in one of the episodes when they
Yeah,
had the debate over
I remember.
Gaza. They were themselves, they weren't councillors in that meeting. So
Mm,
that's why I covered it to the degree I did, because you really got to see the people behind the politics. And we want to encourage more and more of that, which is why on the channel, I very rarely say which team someone is in. It's usually obvious, but we don't focus on that. We focus on the people, because that's the important part. And we do have a lot of good councillors in Colchester, but they've got a lot of strings attached because of those political parties.
yeah, very interesting. Absolutely amazing. Thank you for your service, Rachel, and I'll see you in
You're
a few
welcome.
months, if not before. And thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Eli. It's been a pleasure as always.